Hey, this is Shi Davidi. You're listening to The Walk-Off with Scott and Adam.
Well, we have had a heck of a week when it comes to guests, my man.
It's been great.
It's been great. Thank you so much to everyone who is tuning in, by the way. Welcome to the Walk-Off. I'm Scott Belford, joined as always by Adam Mack. I know we had Arden Zwelling of Sportsnet on the show last Friday in our episode, and our views are phenomenal right now. Thank you so much for checking that out, and of course, very thankful to have Mr. Zwelling come on the show. And then on Tuesday, we had Ben Nicholson-Smith, who wasn't able to do a Zoom with us, and that's why our audio on his is a little bit off because we had to record it over the phone. But it was a phenomenal interview, and what was really cool is so many of you in our Discord, which, by the way, if you are interested in joining our Discord, there is going to be a little link at the bottom of this here that you can join us with. And so all of our Discord folks gave us a bunch of questions for Ben Nicholson-Smith, and that was literally the whole 17 minutes. He gave us 15 to 20 minutes, and so we hit that on the head, and it was pretty much all listener questions, which was very cool. Great job on everyone's part. And then just last night, we sat down with Shi Davidi. We are just rolling through this Sportsnet crew.
Yeah.
But great interview with him. He sat down with us for almost a full hour. We didn't wish to release it last night just in case something broke overnight here, and then we would talk about it, Adam and I, and then tag that on with the interview. Of course, still nothing has happened, so we're pretty up to date with that. We'll throw to Shi in just a moment here. We also sat down with Andrew Stoughton yesterday afternoon, formerly of The Athletic. He now does the Bat Flip, which is a blog on Substack, and phenomenal Blue Jays content. He actually had an article all about Rogers possibly selling off some of their stocks in the Blue Jays. So we delve right into that. So we're going to release that on Saturday. And just a heads up to everyone here, our talk with Shi Davidi and our talk with Andrew Stoughton, although it is everything Blue Jays, we do not cross streams. The Ghostbusters would be very thrilled with us. We were great. So all very different topics. So we're going to release Andrew's interview tomorrow, Saturday. So you can look forward to that. Thank you again, everybody, for tuning in. Really appreciate it. You can follow us on Instagram, The Walk Off Podcast, on Twitter at Walk Off Podcast. We've got TikTok up and going, and you can also join the Discord. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. Enjoy Shi Davidi. So excited for today's guest. We had such a great chat with him last time he was on the show. Thrilled to have him back. Blue Jays insider, Sportsnet analyst for everything baseball, Shi Davidi. Welcome back to the show, my man.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, we're excited to chat with you, buddy. You get no time off, it looks like. You're just as busy as you were last time we chatted with you.
Well, it's a different sort of busy. This is off-season busy, which is the worst kind of busy, actually, because you don't have the fun of actually going to a ballpark and seeing the ball game. And thankfully, we got 2 months of that here this summer, which was awesome. After a season and a half of covering baseball via Zoom, so. Definitely was a fun ending. Certainly a disappointing one for Blue Jays fans. And the team, and certainly understandable why. But there was a big step back towards normalcy, and hopefully 2022 looks a lot like 2019.
Did you know how much you missed it? Like, was it a little surprising how much you missed just going to the ballpark and having some normalcy?
No, I think I knew how much I missed it. Like my first live game back was the All-Star game, which I was fortunate enough to cover. It was the first event actually technically was the Futures game, and I remember just kind of watching the game, and it was a little bit kind of like I felt this weird Canadian hatched back into the wild, into a world without COVID restrictions, as Ontario was still just barely coming out of lockdown at that point. And I walked in the press box, and I've got my KN95 mask on, and it's just like the before times. Nobody's in a mask. We're like elbow to elbow with our neighbors. I was just kind of sitting there in shell shock for a little bit, but I was watching the game playing, and there was just sort of a routine 6-3, I think it was. And I just remember being able to see the whole field and just how everybody was covering and watching the catcher back up, and how some of the fielders were moving into different positions. And it was like, man, I haven't seen that in a year and a half. I really missed that, just the simplicity of it. So, it definitely, it was weird for a while being back in person, but it was a good weird. And it started becoming a bit more normal towards the end of the year. But definitely, I think there was a newfound appreciation, and I certainly think I knew how much I missed it.
It's funny how you watch a game live and you forget how fast everything is happening. I know that when we were talking to Arden, that was one thing he brought up, was just like, oh yeah, like these guys are moving. Like,
oh, 100%. There was one play in the first, I think it was the first game back. Like everything's a blur. I'm pretty sure it was against the Royals. I can't remember. I think Nicky Lopez might have been one of the base runners, but there were just a few different pieces of that play that got disjointed, and somebody should have covered who didn't cover a base, and the KC, I think, ended up scoring a run on it. And I remember turning, I think pretty much I turned to Arden, actually. I said, can you imagine if we were trying to figure out this play off TV? But we could see the whole thing in front of us, right? And it was there were about 6 or 7 things that went wrong on that play in different parts of the field. Like, there was no way that a TV camera could capture it. And it was cool just kind of watching it and seeing the play in totality as opposed to just what the lens allows you to see. So that was certainly something that we appreciated. It was just, I mean, yeah, the power of the game too, is, the speed, just how strong these guys are, man. Like, these guys, like, they're unreal. And, the athletes are getting better as each new generation comes in too. So, the game that you watch it live now, I think back to the first game I went to, I think in 84 or 85, and no disrespect then, but, the quality of athlete now is just, infinitely better.
Mm-hmm. Well, even as a viewer, it's funny that I had forgotten what a big deal it is to hear somebody call the game when they are there and can actually see what's going on. Like the amount of times at the beginning of the year where, and I love Dan Shulman, but, he's just pausing and he's like, yeah, that's gone. Yeah, not foul. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I had some conversations with Danny about that, and what a treasure he is, right? Like, we're so lucky to. I mean, I'm incredibly fortunate to call him a colleague, and I don't get to listen to him as much as other people as a result of that. But he's just so good. He's just the consummate pro, and if anybody was going to step up to that challenge, it's him. But, I felt for him at times where he'd be like, I'm not sure what's happening right now. He's just doing his best to figure it along with everybody else because, when he's on the game, he's got an amazing eye for detail, and he picks things up and he really knows what's going on. So I think like all the broadcasters who had to work under those tough conditions, it's an unreal job on their part.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And by the way, Shai, your writing is great. Like, I really enjoyed it, and it's funny because it's probably an underappreciated part of what you do, but I really enjoy reading your stuff. Loved your article that you just had out about the Jays probably shifting their pitching needs from free agency to possibly going the trade route. Great stuff, man.
Oh, I appreciate it. That's really kind of you to say. And I've started in writing and found my way into broadcasting. It's certainly still a passion. But I appreciate everyone who takes the time to read because, your time is valuable, and there's certainly a lot of options. So anyone who wants to stop and read, I'm really grateful for it.
Well, I might be a rarity in November, but I'm such a baseball nerd. I'm just content I can get. So it's appreciated you're out there putting it out there. I'd love to start with the pitching market here. Things are beginning to unfold, obviously. We just watched the Giants jump in early on stuff. Verlander's back to Houston. Syndergaard's off to the Angels. And then late Tuesday night, we watched 2021 Blue Jays starting pitcher Steven Matz get 4 years with the Cardinals. And I'm really curious on your thoughts on this deal. He got, honestly, longer than I was expecting. I didn't expect Matz to sign a 4-year deal, but he also got less per year than I was kind of expecting. Is this where the market is headed, or is Matz a little bit of an outlier? Like, are pitchers going to be valuing years over maybe the AAV?
I don't know. I think pitchers or players in general, they sort of look at the total compensation, right? And, is that package good for you? And, I had the impression early on that, that area, the sort of Midwest region, was something that would have been of interest to him. And, I certainly, you go to the St. Louis, I mean, they do a lot of things right there, as evidenced by, the consistency of their appearances in the playoffs. Of course, the junior varsity National League Central helps a little bit too, but, I mean, they certainly they certainly do almost everything right there. So, that's certainly part of the attraction. I think for him, what happens with pitchers in that middle tier, and we've seen this happen to quite a few guys in recent years, where there are certain teams whose budgets aren't going to take them into the upper tiers, right? And then there's sort of this lower tier where there's a lot of volatility, you don't know what you're going to get. So the middle class of pitcher, where there's still a little bit of upside, and Steven Matz still has a bit of upside, right? I mean, he's certainly got the downside to be a 5, but there's certainly the upside there where he could be a 3, a solid 3 on a good team. And so, those kind of guys end up finding a bit of a stronger market. And, I thought there was a possibility that he would have signed way back in early November. There was some momentum there for a deal during the GM meetings. And then I think the market kept expanding, and they're like, let's slow it down here a little bit and let's examine all these different options. And he ended up having, something like 8 teams in the mix for him. And he had strong offers. I was told that, he strongly considered the Blue Jays. They've done a really good job in trying to bring him back. But
we're in on him quite heavily, eh?
That's what it sounds like. I mean, I don't know dollar-wise what that looked like. There's some reports out there as 3 years, which would seem to be about right. And I can see them not wanting to go to 4. But, I was told that, they were a serious consideration for him, but, the St. Louis situation, I think, was better for him. It's a great spot for him, right? The pit,
AL East, heck yeah.
Out of the AL East, if there's no universal DH and the pitcher still hits, then, he's naturally going to be removed from games twice through the order. So it kind of takes that out of play for him. He's got a tremendous defense, probably the best defense, or one of the best defenses in Major League Baseball behind him. Yeah, a tough place to hit, like all those pieces. Like he's really set up well for success there. But I think that a lot of teams could look at him and dream on him, and sort of he becomes one of those guys. DeSclafani did really well for someone who's had trouble staying on the field. Andrew Heaney, for a guy coming off a very difficult year. So I think teams end up looking at these guys who have some upside and maybe a little bit less volatility than the lower tier. And those guys end up getting bid up because they're more affordable than the top end guys. And it's a shot at maybe getting elite level or top level performance.
So while we're on Matz here, I did want to bring up Steve Cohen doing his best to continue to the tradition of terrible Mets ownership and front offices. Tweeted angrily at Matz and his agent that he was pretty upset that they didn't get the last kick at the can kind of thing. This is just weird, right? Like, this sort of stuff just happens all the time. Cohen's probably overreacting.
I mean, maybe. I was trying to think about this. Like, I was trying, like, the obvious impression is everybody sort of knee jerks it, like, this is ridiculous, and rightly so, right? But could there be some benefit to this? Could there be some method? Because, like, I mean, he's not a dumb guy. Like, you don't become a billionaire by accident, right? I mean, I guess maybe you can be born into it, and, as we've seen in certain cases. But in general, like you don't make yourself into a billionaire by being a dummy. And so, is there an element of this is a bit of a warning shot to other agents? Like, if you're going to behave in this way, I'm not going to tolerate it. And look, as much as teams are going to look at it and say, oh, that situation's awful and it's crazy and I wouldn't want my players there, like, players need the Mets, right? Like, you want them involved in your bidding because they do have money and it's real money. Like, they paid Francisco Lindor $300 million, right? Like, that's real dollars that we're talking about there.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that certainly there would be, I think a lot of people viewed it as, this is a tantrum by a petulant billionaire who didn't get his way. And I'm there's certainly a degree of that, but there's a part of me, and I am probably wrong about this, but I wonder if there's an element of, warning shot, or if there's some small bit of method behind this madness.
I would agree with that. I think you're right in that there has to be a calculated element to this. There's no benefit otherwise, right?
Right. I mean, and it could be he's just blowing off steam, right? And that Twitter account is certainly been interesting and oft discussed, but I don't know. He certainly had time to think about that one, right? Because the agreement was reached on Tuesday, and then he's tweeting Wednesday morning. There's enough of a gap there that, yeah, you could still be angry, but maybe you've had enough time to think about what you want to put out into the world.
That's a good point.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Shi, Kevin Gausman, and it's weird because I feel like he's becoming the Blue Jays' new Jay Bruce. Like, you just hear rumors that they're in on him every single year whenever he's available. There's interest from the Blue Jays, and he does seem like a really good fit. What do you like about Kevin Gausman? And do you personally, and obviously the Jays front office will decide this for themselves, but do you personally think he's the best fit for the Blue Jays in the free agent starting pitching market? And what money and years would you be comfortable seeing him get from the Jays?
Oh, wow, there's a lot there. So I actually had an interesting conversation with him at the All-Star game. And I asked him about how that situation played out in the offseason versus, him turning down, I believe it was a 3-year deal from the Blue Jays for the 1-year QO. And he said that, essentially that the QO was just such a strong number relative to his AAVs. And curiously, not curiously, interestingly, it might have been sort of a similar situation that Matz was in if Matz had been extended a QO, right? And obviously different pitchers, but someone coming off a strong rebound year in a situation where he's made some changes. Does Matz take the QO back at the beginning of November? I think he probably does, even though he ended up doing nearly $26 million better than the QO in total guarantee. I still think that it's such a strong 1-year number that he'd have to replicate, $8.5 million over 3 years after the QO to match what he got. And, unless he had a total collapse, that's very achievable. So, with Gausman, I do think that he was impressed with what he saw from the Blue Jays. He obviously was familiar with Toronto from pitching in Baltimore all those years. He actually debuted in Toronto, so he's had some positive memories. And look, he's coming from a organization that's done a very nice job of getting pitchers right and helping them be their best version of themselves. Is he the best fit? I think you can make a strong case that Robbie Ray is the guy that the Blue Jays should bring back. I don't know that he'd want to pitch here or if they could get him, but Max Scherzer is certainly in a lot of ways sort of exactly what they need, right? Just like, that proven, been through it all, will kind of light a fire under everybody kind of guy. Yeah, it's tough to argue against Max Scherzer in terms of your free agent options. So, I think that is interesting. And, from a financial standpoint, I don't know where things are going. Obviously, Ray and Gausman both have 9-figure ambitions right now. My belief, my understanding is that the Blue Jays feel they still have capacity for one more mega contract in this current financial cycle that they're in. And, to me, part of the question is, are you giving that to a pitcher? Are you giving that to, someone like Marcus Semien? I think in an ideal world, they would love to get Corey Seager, but I don't think Corey Seager is going to be moving off shortstop for them. and Bo Bichette is the Blue Jays shortstop.
Yeah.
So, I think that's sort of where the Blue Jays are. And, longer term, do you want to put this contract into a pitcher knowing how volatile pitching is, or would you rather put that money into a position player where, there are more ways to get the value? So, I think those are sort of the debates right now. The other thing is I do think the Blue Jays could trade for that, upper level starter that they need. And, the Blue Jays have some assets. I think they're going to have to do some of their business in trade because they're going to need some financial efficiency. So I would guess that they end up trading for a pitcher, but I could certainly be wrong there.
So I know the name I'm about to throw out your way here is one that's going to raise the ire of some Blue Jays fans, but Marcus Stroman is all over Twitter talking about how great he is. This does rub fans the wrong way sometimes, but whether you enjoy Marcus Stroman's online persona or not, he is one of the best available pitchers out there. Do you believe Marcus Stroman is a frontline pitcher? He is, right? And is there any chance the Jays circle back on him?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the performance. I mean, it's tough to argue against the performance, right? Whatever criticism people may want to level at him, I mean, he just needs to show them the back of the baseball card, and that's it. I do think Marcus is genuine when he said he loves Toronto and would be open to coming back here. He literally got the city tattooed on his back. Or maybe his chest. I'm not sure where the tattoo was, but he did get a tattoo of Toronto. Yeah, he's got it printed on his body one way or the other. So, I don't think you're doing that for whim or to pretend. So, there's certainly a genuineness to that. I'm not sure the way things ended here that relationship can be rekindled. I think there were a lot of ill feelings, bad ways, and only the people involved can know for sure who's to blame for that, or whatever the case may be. But I'd have a hard time seeing the Blue Jays circling back to Marcus Stroman based on the way things ended. And, that was unfortunate because he certainly was genuine here and he's certainly a talent. And, I wrote a fair bit at the time about, how if the Blue Jays traded him away, they were going to spend a lot of time trying to recreate him. And here they are trying to recreate him. Although, on the flip side, they did use one of the pieces they got back for him to help get Jose Barrios, who's going to be locked up here long term. So, they've certainly made the most of the return that they've gotten for him.
Well, bringing up Barrios, I mean, as we watch this kind of pitching market unfold, it's kind of tough not to be even more excited about this deal, right? Barrios really could wind up being the deal of the offseason, even though he was already a member of this team.
Well, I mean, I think from a long-term standpoint, sure, right? Because this was something that you needed to get done. And, the Blue Jays had a window before he started resuming his workouts, that he was open to getting this done. Otherwise, he didn't want to have a negotiation hanging over his head. The Blue Jays were certainly interested. And, the sense I got right away when, the Blue Jays made the deal for him was that this was something that they hoped to do and that they felt that they could do in a way that the Twins couldn't. And certainly for whatever reason, the Twins, negotiations with the Twins never got anywhere. But the Jays and his agency, they were aligned on what the value looked like. They had what was a very efficient negotiation. They obviously had their disagreements and their backs and forths, but they found a way to hammer this out, and they were, by and large on the same page throughout the process, which doesn't always happen. So, I think that led it together. It was very important for them. And this is a big piece, but, like you said, he was going to be here next year anyways. Mm-hmm. So, what they do to make 22 better is, the real question for them right now. I guess, they took care of a long-term piece with this, which is important. And maybe in that way, it does become sort of the deal of the offseason, as you said. But, really the test is going to be what they do to make 22 better, because this is a roster that needs some augmentation.
Mm-hmm. Well, talking of 2022 and just holes they need to fill, I saw a rumor just recently that Marcus Semien is after 7 years, which just seems like a very lengthy deal. And the fact he's with the Boris Corporation, though, I mean, you can't discount that it might happen. Marcus is 31. He's incredibly durable. I mean, he did it, which is funny how durable he is, because it's not talked about enough, I think. 162 games he played this year. Like, he played every single game. Can you see someone going 7 years on Marcus?
So here's the thing. When you're getting to a player, I kind of look at it a little bit sort of the way DJ LeMahieu's deal, right? This is probably going to be the last contract for Marcus Semien, right? And so, the team that's committing the value, like, you have an issue, like how over how many years do you want to amortize that, right? Mm-hmm. Like, do you want to amortize it over 6? Do you want to amortize it over 8? And I think the big question becomes, what's the total guarantee? And if you agree on the guarantee, because it's at the back end, and you're probably not getting great value, at the age 38, 39 seasons. At that point, maybe it's just the team's way of spreading the cost over a longer period. So, DJ LeMahieu did that for the Yankees last year. And maybe that's something that a team does to get Marcus Semien under contract. But I think the way that the game has generally treated aging curves and free agents at that age group, we typically don't see deals of that length. Although George Springer under similar circumstances got 6 years, so that maybe does bode well for him.
Yeah. Maybe even if they front load whoever takes him, front load the contract so that they're not dealing with it at the end, and just however that contract is structured, organizations can get creative. Exactly like you said with LeMahieu, right? Like, that extra year, he still got the same, whether it was 5 or 6 years, pretty much it felt like anyways. So.
Yeah, and that was basically designed for them to work around the luxury tax threshold, the competitive value tax, the CBT. But ultimately, I think players tend to be willing to work with teams, and it's about the total value. And we've seen a lot of creativity, but one thing to keep in mind with Marcus Semien is that he's on the Players Union's very influential executive subcommittee. He's going to be involved in the CBA negotiations. I think any contract that he takes, he will have the bigger picture of the game in mind, because he'll want to establish a value that will help other players in the future. So, I think that'll certainly be part of his thinking as he negotiates or examines his various options.
He's such an interesting case. I'm actually just really excited to see where he lands, what he gets, like what his value is on this market. So we'll move on here, and we brought it up at the very top of this interview here, the article that you wrote, and it was on the Sportsnet app yesterday about the Jays very possibly going the trade route for some of these spots that they need to fill. And I know it's impossible to know what direction this front office may take, but especially when it comes to targets. But I'm curious if you've heard anything on the pieces other teams are inquiring about from the Jays, and maybe some guys in the organization that the Jays may be willing to move to fill some of these holes that they need to fill.
Well, we've heard, myself and others on the beat, we've heard that, the Jays are getting a lot of calls on their catching, and which is quite obvious because there isn't a lot of catching in the market, and the Jays have a surplus, and they have Gabriel Moreno coming now. So, that's an obvious area for other teams to target, and they have an obvious surplus in the outfield. Right? They've got, they got 4 guys who can play regularly. And that's certainly another area that the Blue Jays could trade from. Now, from a farm system perspective, they made obviously the big move for Barrios with Austin Martin and Simeon Woods Richardson, and that took away 2 top 10 prospects from, their farm system. But, they still have a relatively deep system that they can use. I don't think the Blue Jays want to strip it down. But, one thought that I've had, and, I think is, maybe symbolic of where they are right now, is like you think back to after the 2016 season and Christian Yelich hit the market. And, the Jays had, talked a bit with the Marlins, and the Marlins had asked for something like, either Vladdy or Bo, plus Danny Jansen, plus Ryan Baraki, plus Anthony Alford, right? And, at the time with, a team on the decline, a team that needed some depth, and was going to, in all likelihood, be facing a rebuild, that's a tough price to pay, right? Even for a player who is under great contractual control, the way Yelich is, or was at that point, and the impact that he was going to provide. In many ways, you're hoping that one of the guys that you're trading away is going to become Christian Yelich as an offensive player. But where the Blue Jays are right now, they don't have time to wait for all their guys to develop, right? They've got to augment this group now. So if, that type of a deal now makes more sense for the Blue Jays. So, I don't think he's available. I think you'd have to really twist the Twins' arm. But if you could look at someone like Polanco there, he'd be a great fit. He's got a good contract for 3 years, I believe. And then you can possibly extend him afterwards. And, part of what you're paying for when you trade him is the financial efficiency that he's providing. That's part of what your acquisition is. So, I think that type of a deal now makes more sense for them. I can't see a scenario in which they trade Gabriel Moreno. I guess I could imagine one but it would be so ludicrous that nobody's going to do it. But I do think someone like Orelvis Martinez, who was getting a lot of interest around trade deadline time, that's someone that teams are going to be interested in and maybe could be the centerpiece of a deal. So I do think they have a lot of opportunity to be creative. It's just, how willing are they going to be and what are the prices going to end up being?
Well, I actually love how many different directions this front office could go. Like, they are a creative bunch to begin with. Do you think that there's any chance that we see a major shakeup, like something like we saw December of 1990, right, when the Jays swapped Fred McGriff and Tony Fernandez for Joe Carter and Robbie Alomar? Like, is it possible we see a core piece move of Bichette or a Teoscar?
I can't. Bichette and Guerrero, no, right?
That's what we wanted to hear.
I wonder about Teoscar, and not that I think the Blue Jays want to trade him, but there's sort of 2 years of contractual control there before he's eligible for free agency. Are the Blue Jays going to be able to extend him and do all the other work, and then at some point shoehorn in a Bichette and Guerrero extension, which is going to be major money, and then while still augmenting the club. So I don't know. Maybe you just ride it out with Teoscar Hernandez for the next couple of years, and then he's a free agent, and see where things go from there. On the flip side, maybe you examine where you can get what you can get for him, and maybe he's you're doing a need for need deal with somebody, maybe even a bit of a challenge trade. So I just think that the Blue Jays, knowing the way they operate, they sort of try to examine all the different opportunities and then see what puzzle pieces they can fit together, and then choose a route based on what they think is the best picture that they construct. So that would be the process that I think the Blue Jays would go through. So I think that they'll examine all kinds of wild scenarios. The vast majority of them have no chance of coming into reality.
Right. No, it's going to be interesting over the next couple of years, because they do, and the Jays have money, but they definitely do have some decisions to make on guys like Teoscar and stuff. If you are going to lock Bichette and Vladdy up long term, there's definitely going to need to be some shuffling of the cards, if you will. And you brought it up, Shi, and Gabriel Moreno. I mean, honestly, I feel like we talk about him every single week at this point. And he was just ranked as the #1 prospect in the Arizona Fall League, according to MLB Pipeline, in a league filled with top prospects. And one thing that surprised me, actually, while I was reading his write-up about the Arizona Fall League, was that he had thrown out 47% of base stealers in the AFL this year. What have you heard of Moreno lately, and how high is this kid stealing? Because the more that we hear about him, the more everyone's like, the kid's going to be a superstar.
It's funny because I started hearing people raving about him, I think probably early 2019, before, I think he was, that's the year he was in Lansing. And I remember coming out of spring training, talking to some player development people. They're like, "Hey, make sure you're paying attention to this Moreno kid. Like this, he's the real thing." And he's only sort of skyrocketed since. And even last year during the pandemic year, he was among the Venezuelan kids who got stuck in Florida when the lockdown hit, who was being housed in a hotel there. And he found a way to be positive and to find ways to develop through that difficult time. The Blue Jays ended up rewarding him by bringing him up to their alt site. And this year, honestly, I was talking to Gil Kim, the Blue Jays director of player development, and he said, they were waiting for, he was like putting up Bichette and Guerrero numbers at AA. And they were like, well, let's see if the league slows him down. And the only thing that slowed him down was a broken thumb, right, because the league couldn't find a way to calm him down. So he certainly maintained that in the Arizona Fall League. And I think from sort of the club's perspective right now, they still want, they're very pleased with the growth that he's made in sort of his swing decisions. Like he's one of those gifted contact hitters that can get bat to ball on any number of different pitches, and the Blue Jays have tried to get him to become a little bit more selective, saying just because you can hit that pitch doesn't mean that you should. And sort of they really like the game there. They like the increased leadership he's showing in game calling and handling pitchers, and the way that he's taking charge in their pregame meetings, their postgame breakdowns, and those kinds of things. But he's also somebody who's missed a lot of reps, both because of the pandemic and because of the broken thumb this year. So from the defensive side, I think they want him to continue growing there, but that bat is going to force a decision on this team sooner rather than later. And at one point in time, it was maybe he's up in 22, and I think it's starting to trend towards when and not if.
It is interesting to see how they are going about Moreno's development. I do enjoy seeing them give him the opportunity to play a little bit of third base, and I don't actually think that he's going to be a full-time third baseman, but it sure is nice to see them looking at ways to get that catcher's bat in the lineup every game. And it's going to be fun to watch how this all plays out with him, I think. Yeah,
well, I mean, the Blue Jays do love their positional flexibility, right? But the one thing that, an interesting comp, I was thinking about like Russ Martin when he was catching at the Dodgers early in his career. He started playing some third base there. Russ was saying that he wanted to do that to just stay athletic, so that he didn't feel like he was sort of stiffening up and losing the flexibility and mobility behind the plate. But the way things are going right now, if you can have a player who can get to a place where he can fill in at third and catch and do this, that might work for the Blue Jays, because especially with the way they're set up right now, like Danny Jansen, I know, gets a lot of flack from people, but I don't know that the general public appreciates the value he brings behind the plate, the trust that he has in pitchers, his skill in game calling and game planning. Like, the Blue Jays have spent a long time helping him grow into this. And, full credit to Danny. He's always put his defense, his catching, and his pitchers first, ahead of his hitting. And he's been really selfless and all those things. He's a valuable piece. And so if you could have Moreno there where, maybe you create a job share where Moreno's playing a little bit third, maybe the occasional first, and then he's at DH and behind the plate, and Danny Jansen's behind the plate the rest of the time. That's a pretty good setup you have at catcher. So, I think the Blue Jays want to keep a lot of options open, and then, with Carlos Delgado all those years ago, the Blue Jays got to a point where they're like, this bat is too valuable for us to risk it behind home plate. We need to put him somewhere else. He ended up at first base via left field. And maybe there's a scenario where, Moreno's bat is just, they're like, we can't risk it behind the plate. We're going to dream that we have JT Realmuto here, but, maybe we just put him at somewhere else on the diamond and just take the bat and not worry about the defensive piece.
I just love how many top prospects this team has been blessed with over the last few years. It's pretty cool to see the system continuing to bring up guys like Aralvis and Moreno and stuff like that after witnessing it with Bo and Vladdy, obviously. It's a pretty solid system, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit thinner now than it has been, and understandably so. And Gunnar Hoagland, their first rounder from last year, that's it's an interesting pick, and he's in their top 10, but his development is going to be slowed significantly by that recovery from the Tommy John. So, there are some gaps in the system right now. Like Mark Shapiro liked to talk about waves of prospects, and sort of one wave has kind of hit, or a couple waves have hit now. And, sort of the water is, pooling again, waiting for that next wave. So there is a bit of a gap right now, but, I think from the perspective of where this roster is, from both a contractual standpoint and a talent standpoint, what the Blue Jays need now is just, to be able to integrate a player or two every year, as opposed to needing this critical mass of prospects to turn around a franchise.
Absolutely. So last week, the Canadian government announced that it lifted the national interest exemption that allows unvaccinated players and athletes to travel to Canada. So starting January 15th, 2022, unvaccinated players will be restricted from traveling to Canada. And I can imagine that this has some massive implications for the Blue Jays and who they sign and the directions they take. And I'm curious if you've heard anything on what this means for opposing teams with unvaccinated players.
All right, so as we're speaking, and it's Thursday, November 25th at this point, what I know as of now is is that the Blue Jays are still trying to fully grasp what this is going to look like for them, what this is going to mean for them and for Major League Baseball, and what the potential impacts of that are going to be beyond that. So, I think the Blue Jays have been doing some work on that. Obviously, the government, between the terrible things that are happening in BC, and we obviously wish people there the best who are fighting the effects of the flooding there. The government certainly has some bigger things on their plate right now. But I think the Blue Jays are trying to sort out that piece, trying to get an understanding of what it means. And, I think that's something that has to factor into their thinking when they're making player acquisitions, because if they were to acquire someone who was or who is unvaccinated and does not have an interest in becoming vaccinated, then, they could potentially acquire someone who they can't use. So, that certainly has to be in there, or certainly has to be a consideration at this point. Which is why I think their desire, or their attempts to try and figure out, is this a forever thing? Is there a pathway to a national interest exemption again? Is there, what are the factors that will determine this? All those pieces are in play right now for the Blue Jays, and they certainly do have implications both for them and then for visiting clubs as well.
Well, okay, so right now with these vaccine passports and whatever we want to call it that seems to be going on across Canada, if anybody wants to go somewhere movie theater, a restaurant, or whatever that requires proof of vaccination. The alternative is just or show that you've taken a rapid test result and have tested negative recently, right? At your own expense. Could that not just be a simple solution? Like if we bring these guys in, we just test them, and I mean it might cost a little extra, but shouldn't that just be a simple workaround?
Well, I mean, that it certainly depends on, how the government's going to view the policy and how strictly they want to enforce it. And, the way the announcement was written, there were some pathways to exemptions from that. If there were, some reasons that prevented someone from becoming vaccinated, they could make some exceptions, but the government has to decide, and the whether that's a path they want. And you think about the term, it was a national interest exemption that the athletes had, and this isn't just sort of baseball players, it's NHL players, it's Major League, although the NHL did not request an NIE this year, National Basketball Association, amateur and pro athletes competing in different events. Basically any arriving athlete, not just baseball players. The government had determined it's in the national interest to grant these people an exemption from the quarantine rules because of this. So can Major League Baseball negotiate another one of those? Can the Blue Jays convince them that, the modified quarantine plan that they had in place last year would still be a proper way to do this with enhanced testing for players who were unvaccinated? That's entirely possible, but, the government would have to make that decision. And so, I can understand part of, the government's thinking here is in trying to find ways to encourage people to be vaccinated, trying to encourage Canadians who are on the fence to, decide that, this shot is safe and there are benefits to having this shot because it allows our entire society to move closer to normalcy. But, I think that's ultimately going to depend on whether that's, the government feels that there's a national interest in that, and if that makes sense.
What an interesting little caveat that the Jays and just Canadian sports teams in general need to kind of consider going forward, right?
Right. Well, the different sports leagues have all taken different approaches, and I think obviously the Nets with the Kyrie Irving situation, they've drawn a line in the sand, and that's certainly one way to handle it. Saying like, if you're a part of this is what the requirement is, and we saw that with some of the NHL clubs too, saying, you're going to hurt us if you don't do this. And, there's certainly that aspect of it. You wish that, the science would be enough to convince people. I remember talking to my son before he got his first shot, he was 13 at the time. And, he had heard and TikTok or Snapchat, and he heard all these kinds of stories about these side effects that he was going to get, and where that all these spike proteins were going to collect in certain parts of his body and things like that. And so, I kind of went through the science of it with him, saying this is why I feel this, based on this research and talking to, these experts and listening to what these scientists who've done real research as opposed to just sort of reading up on Facebook. This is why they say.
You're not following internet scientists. No?
Well, you know what? I mean, like I did not consult with Joe Rogan. It was personal decision, but I wanted someone who had done a little bit more direct lab work than Joe on this one. And so there are ways to kind of convince people that you can do this and make them feel safe, and that it doesn't need to be coercive. But, at a certain point, if people want to keep their heads in the sands, I mean, everybody does have their right, and the majority also has the right to exclude you if you don't want to take this step. So that's kind of the reality of the situation at this point, and you are free to not take the shot, but in making that decision there are consequences to that.
Absolutely, 100%. Shi, always appreciate your time, man. Just the fact that you're sitting down with a little podcast out of Alberta, we really do appreciate it, and we love chatting ball with you. Do you have time for a little? I want to talk a little bit of broadcasting with you if you got a few more minutes.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Yeah, awesome. And I mean, obviously, we're in the dead of it now, right? Rumors are swirling. Players are starting to sign contracts. Sources and breaking news fast has become just a bigger and bigger part of what you do, and Twitter is kind of moving that even further ahead. How difficult is it sometimes to confirm stuff that is breaking? And have you personally ever run into a situation where maybe a source or some intel isn't quite what you were hoping it would be? How do you continue to stay accurate, I guess, is the question.
Well, I think for me, it's who's telling you, right? And if if I'm going to, report something, I'm going to generally want someone who's directly involved, or who has a hand in it, and is 100% certain of what's happening. So, I think there's sort of, if you create sort of an information food chain, right? And, if it's something that isn't, your information needs to be coming from somewhere high up on the food chain. You may take information that you get from lower down the food chain, and then check that, cross-reference that, and make sure that's okay. And that's sometimes where you may need 2 or 3 people to corroborate something. But if you're getting it from somebody who you can be certain that they know what's up, then maybe it's one person at that point. So I think these things are all a matter of how correct you want to be, and some people are okay not batting 1,000. For me, I believe kind of part of what I've established is that if I say something, it's right. I'm not, especially with stuff that is going to come out eventually, I don't want to kill myself to try and be first on something, when if it's something that everybody's going to find out anyways. So I'd rather be right than be first every time, and try to give people the best information about that.
It's funny how you put that, because credibility is so difficult to build, but yet so easy to just lose, right?
Well, yeah. And yeah, I think that because of the way news cycles have changed, because of the way, social media has changed the game, there are some people who aren't as afraid about being wrong as maybe they might have been in the past, because it kind of gets washed away pretty quickly. But I just think that, when you do this job, you have a relationship with, the people who are reading you and following you and, engaging with the team. If you're not going to be as responsible as you can be, then, you're doing them a disservice. And that's not a healthy way to have the relationship. So, my hope is that, when people, see what I put out there or what I write, that they have faith in it, that it's researched and that it's informed, and that, it's as correct as we can get. Because, I mean, look, we all peddle in information to some degree. We're all victims or products of what people are willing to tell us. And, we all try to get as full a picture as possible. So there are times where, maybe, there's some information that there's some agenda in, or whatever the case may be. But I think that what, my goal is, I think what everyone covering the Blue Jays goal is to try and just give you as accurate a picture as we can get at any given time. And not just kind of sort of, chuck half court, chuck balls up at half court, hoping it finds the basket.
Yeah. So, last question here for you, and I am curious about, because you're at this point an experienced sports broadcaster, you've been doing it for years, and I know that the life and work combo is sometimes a difficult thing to kind of balance, right? And I know, like, as a stand-up comic, one of my biggest detriments when I first started those first 5 to 10 years is that I completely killed my family life and my social life to do this. And now that I'm like almost 15 years in, I've realized how important it is to have an actual life outside of it. Have you found that balance, and how difficult is that to maintain?
Well, it's surprising how giving up nights and weekends for a consistent basis can impact
Right.
everything else, for decades. I think that, for me, like, one, if you have a passion for what you're doing, and, obviously you have a passion for comedy, I have a passion for covering sports, that's really important, right? Because you're doing this because for the right reasons. And then I think in terms of your personal life, if you're able to surround yourself with people who understand that you have that you're pursuing a passion, and that you're doing it for the betterment of your family and your entire situation, then I think that goes a long way. I'm very fortunate that my wife, we met in journalism school at the university formerly known as Ryerson, and so she understands the industry. She understood the industry, and very helpful. But that doesn't always make it easy, right? When I was covering the 2015 playoffs, that season I was gone. I did, I think, 67 of the 81 road games. I was at spring training, was at All-Star, I was at postseason. I was at almost every home game. That was a lot. And, my older son, who's pretty close to me, a little bit closer to me than my younger one, who is a bit clingier to his mom. He was like, when the Blue Jays got eliminated, he came up to me and said, "Hey, I was the only kid in school who was happy the Jays lost, because now you get to be home," right? And so that part of it is difficult. So you do put a toll on your family, but I try to be as present as possible when I'm around, and contribute and be parts of their lives. I've coached their hockey teams all the way through. I haven't coached them in baseball because I haven't been able to around enough. But, my older son is swimming competitively, and I'm always at meets with him when he's at meets and things like that. My younger son is a bit more into tennis, which not a game that I'm good at, but I try to participate in that as much as possible. And then look, I think if people are understanding of you, and you are giving of yourself to the people that you care about, then you can find a way to maintain that. But it's certainly not easy, and you have to be committed to your personal life in order to make it work, because you don't get the ability to cruise control it, because you have the gift of constant presence.
Yeah. That's great, man. Thank you so much for such insightful and in-depth answers. And we always enjoy sitting down and chatting with you. Really appreciate you coming back on the show.
Yeah, no problem. Enjoyed the chat, and hopefully we'll be talking again when spring comes around.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Shay.
Take care, guys.